Hi everyone, hope you all doing well. Welcome back to our channel. In this video, I'm going to get started with Microsoft Azure REST APIs, and I'm going to show you how you can use Oauth 2.0 authorization code flow to access these APIs with the help of Postman. Now, since this is the first video, so the agenda is fairly simple. I'll show you a method to register an application in Azure AD, a very high level overview of how authorization code flow is working when you're trying to access an API. Then structure of Azure management APIs or endpoints, to be very precise, how you can generate one or how you can construct one in terms of the resource that you're trying to access. And lastly, I'll just show you how you can use that endpoint to access a specific resource with the help of Postman. Now, there are many different concepts which I'm going to use as a reference point in this particular video. So it's my suggestion that if by any chance you don't know how Azure AD application work, practically speaking, either application or service principal object, or what is the purpose of API permission, or what is the purpose of authorization code flow, how exactly the interaction happens between the application and IDP, or even role-based access console, I would sincerely recommend you to please go ahead and watch this first video, which is role-based access control. I mean, I created this long back, but practically nothing has been changed. And this is going to help you end-to-end in terms of understanding what is role-based access control. Then this video is application and service principal object, which is going to let you know how exactly the entire consent framework works. And you can watch this playlist if you want to know how exactly all the protocols are working in terms of interaction between the application and the IDP. Now, without any delay, let's get started with this particular video. As I've said, the very first thing that you need is an Azure AD application. So let me switch to my machine where I've signed into portal.azure.com, and this account with which I am signed in, this account has access permissions for two different subscriptions. Let me just remove this filter so that we'll get to see all the subscriptions. Yeah. Okay, wait. Let me click on apply. Yeah. So this account has access to these two subscriptions. And if I click on all resources, anything that is practically getting listed over here exists in either one of these two subscriptions. So in this video, I'm going to show you methods for, let's say, 4 or 5 different examples of how you can create or how you can construct one specific endpoint that you have to reach for a specific resource type. Okay. So now I'm going to click on Azure AD. And I'm going to complete my first step, and that is creation of an application. Okay. So now I'm inside app registration, and I'm going to click on new registration. And now I'm going to type, let's say, CW Azure API and REST. Okay. This is the name of my application. Now I'll keep this first option selected, and here I'm going to type web, and here I'm going to say HTTPS localhost. That's it. Okay. And then I'm going to click on register. Now, as of now, since I'm creating this application, obviously the application object and the service principal object is getting created in this Azure AD itself. Okay. Now, there is a specific permission which is required for this application to access API, but I am intentionally not granting those permissions, and this will help me to showcase you two different use cases. I mean, two different scenarios wherein if you're getting a specific error, how you should troubleshoot. Okay. So imagine right now I just have an application, and I'm going to use this application to access Azure resources with Oauth 2.0 authorization code flow. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to Postman. So on this particular machine, I have just installed Postman, and I'm going to use this console to perform my next step, which is requesting token. And let's see how far it goes. Okay. So I'm going to click on this option which says new, and then I'm going to click on HTTP, and I'm just going to minimize this. Now, this first section is the console where we are actually going to type the endpoints which are required, okay, to access a specific resource. For example, management.azure.com/subscription/subscription ID. Okay, so this console will be typically used for typing Azure endpoints which we are trying to reach. But before we even go there, the very first thing that we need is the token itself. So for that, I'm going to click on Authorization, and then I'm going to click on this option of Oauth 2.0. So for now, if you see, I don't have any token available, so I'm not going to make any change here or even here. I'll just scroll down, and in the token name, I'm going to type Azure REST. Okay. In the grant type, I'll keep it authorization code itself. And now in the callback URL, you need to typically type the same address which you have given while registering application. So you see over here, https://localhost, and this is something which should match with one of the values that you have given and that exists here. Okay, so I'll come back to my Postman console. Now it is asking me for auth URL, which basically means the authorized endpoint, right? So now I have clicked on overview, and then I have clicked on endpoints from the same console where my application exists. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in, and for this particular demo, I'm going to use V1 endpoints. Now again, what is the purpose of this endpoint, how exactly the flow works, everything has been covered already. So I'm just keeping these concepts as a reference point. V1 endpoint, and the one which we have selected is the authorized endpoint where the first request will reach. Okay, now here, token endpoint, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste that value in token URL. Okay, now it is asking me for my client ID. So I'll close this, I'll zoom out, I'll copy my application or client ID. And then here it is asking me for a secret. So I'll go here and I'll click on new client secret. I'll choose the least possible value available on the console, and I'll click on add. And now I'm going to copy this value. I'll come back and I'll paste that value here. Now, since we are using V1.0 endpoints, scope is not required. Okay, rather what is required is a value called token. So how to populate that? For that, you have to scroll down and go to this particular section which says token request. Okay, now here just go ahead and type resource, and in the value type https management.core.windows.net. Let me just show you this value in the notepad with bigger font size. This is what you have to type: https management.core.windows.net. Okay, now I'll go back and I'll click on get new access token. So for now on Postman, I have not mentioned anything here because here exactly your available token gets listed. In the header prefix, it's bearer. In token name, it's Azure REST, grant type authorization code, callback URL localhost, the one that we have given, both the endpoints, client ID, client secret. And then in the token request, a key has been added as resource, and then the value is management.core.windows.net. In this particular section, you have to choose this option which says request body. Don't choose these two options. It has to be request body only. Okay. Now, the moment I'll click on this, the expected behavior is I will get prompted to sign in with an account that has privilege to access Azure resources, because there is a user interaction which is required in authorization code. And since this is the first time I'm signing in, I should be presented with the consent prompt. Okay, now the consent should be whether I allow this application to access Azure resources or not. Okay, so let's see what happens. So I've clicked on that option of get new access token, and as you can see, I'm getting this prompt. Now I might have used Postman for some other demo, so that's why one of the entry exists here for my account. So I'm just going to click on this, and then I'm going to quickly type my password and then click on sign in. Now you can see I'm getting this consent prompt. But wait a second. See, the information that I'm getting over here is related to Graph. It's not related to Azure. Now, with this being said, again, those of you who have seen application and service principal object or who know how the consent framework part works will be able to relate. Okay, so I'm getting this prompt because currently in my application, there is only one specific permission has been mapped. Now, which is this one. Okay, so now even if I approve this, even if I click on accept, this authentication will fail because the resource that I'm trying to access is different and the permission that I'm getting is different, right? Now, let me show you what do I mean by this. Okay, let me just copy this entire error and paste it here. Okay, now what you see over here is unauthorized client, invalid resource. The client has requested access to a resource which is not listed in the requested permission of the client's application registration. Okay, and this is my application. So let's say you have created an application and you tried accessing Azure REST APIs or endpoints and you are getting this error. It typically means that you have to come back to this particular console and then click on add permission, and then you have to click on this option of Azure Service Management. Okay, now see, this section is where user interaction is possible. This section typically used for client credential flow. Now, since we are using Oauth 2.0 authorization code flow, I'm going to click on this option and I'm going to delegate this permission by clicking on add permission. Now, there is also one more documentation which says that it also supports implicit flow. I have not discussed that in detail, but hopefully with this series, we'll complete that as well. Okay, so as of now, I have given the permission of user impersonation, okay, for the API, which is Azure Service Management, to my application, which we have just registered, which means the expected behavior is that if I come back to my console, okay, everything should work as expected, but it will still not work. Now, the reason behind that is, even though I have added the permission, okay, this time there was no consent prompt, if you remember, right? So even though the permission has been added, it can't be consented because there is an active session that's working with my account. So assume if this is something that you get in your use case, or when you're trying to reproduce, or when you're trying to do this in your environment. In this case, you can typically come back to your application console, which is portal.azure.com, and then click on this option which says grant admin consent for concepts work. That's all you have to do. Once this application is consented for this particular instance, then a user, or let's say any user who's trying to access this particular application with the Oauth 2.0 authorization code flow, for them it should work. Okay, so now if I click on this option of get new access token, the entire authentication should work as expected. Okay, so now if I click on proceed, I can see my token. Okay, and if I copy this value and if I go to jwt.ms, you can see my token is getting listed over here. Okay, now I'll just click on this option of use token. That means this token is now added in this particular section of header token, right? You see this use token type access token, and then I can see it here. Okay, now since we have a requested token, the next step is to go ahead and make sure you have the rights access, or let's say the right API permission has already been assigned. So while I was showing you the process of requesting token, I've shown you how the assignment typically works for an application. The next thing is to go ahead and access an Azure resource itself, right? Now see, typically what happens that there is a specific endpoint that you have to reach for a specific resource type. So if I talk about this particular example, I'm trying to access a resource group, which is Azure VM. Okay, but then there are so many other components as well. For example, https management.azure.com. This will remain constant if you're trying to access any resource that is available in your Azure subscription. This part that you see over here, subscription, then subscription ID, then a specific resource group, and then the resource group name. This is basically nothing but the resource ID itself. Okay, I'll show you this in a lot more detail, and then things will make a lot more sense. And the last part is API version. So practically speaking, a typical endpoint that you will be accessing will be divided into these three different categories: endpoint, which is this section itself, then the resource ID, and then the API version. Now in the official documentation of Microsoft, this has been described in a different manner altogether, but I am describing it here so that you can just log into Azure portal and figure out what exactly you need, okay, or which set of information you should refer to incorporate that in a specific request that you're trying to send to Azure. So let's access the first endpoint, which is the subscriptions. I just want to know that how many subscriptions exist where my account has access. Think about this. So it is management.azure.com subscriptions, that's it, and then a API version. Okay, now if I come back here, I'll go here and click on send, and then let me bring up, yeah, you can see I'm getting this response now. Now one more very important aspect which is related to authorization code flow, or practically speaking overall API access, very specific to management.azure.com, which is Azure REST APIs, and that is, since we are using user impersonation, it typically means that you will only be able to access those resources which an account is allowed to access. So what do I mean by this? The account that I have used while signing in here is the co-admin of these two subscriptions, so I can practically access any resource that exists. So let's say there could be a scenario that your account has different permissions for different subscriptions. In this case, whatever permission is available to you for a specific scope, okay, those are the only actions which you can perform. So for example, in a subscription you might be having owner access, so you can go ahead and even create resources like this, or going to a specific endpoint and creating resource. But if on the other subscription you only have reader permission, then with the same account, with the same token, everything being same, you will not be able to perform any other action apart from just querying and reading that particular resource type. That's it. Okay, now let me come back to my browser and show you a couple of things. Okay, so if you remember what I was showing you in the deck, that a typical endpoint is having three different components, okay, which is management.azure.com, then this particular section, and then API version. Now let me show you how you can actually construct this for any of the resource type. Let's start from a resource group itself, okay. In the overview section, if I go, I get this option of JSON view. If I click on this, I'm getting resource ID and a specific API version. But if I scroll down and if I click on properties, I can also check resource ID from here. But I would always suggest you to use this option of JSON view because you'll also know how many API versions are available for this particular resource type, okay? And this is something which is really important. I mean, I'm just telling you all the methods so you can choose one according to your requirement, okay? So I'm going to copy this and let me paste this in a notepad, okay? Now let's come back here and I can see 2020-06-01, which is this one itself, okay? So no change. I'm just going to copy this from here and I'm going to add it here. And then what you need is management.azure.com. That's it. I'm going to paste it here and I'm going to delete this space. I'm going to copy this new URL. I'll come back to my Postman and I'll paste that value here and send. Perfect. You can see now I can access a specific resource group. The name is Azure Sentinel. Now let's move on to one more resource, and in this case let's consider the example of Exchange server, okay? This is one of my VM. So here I'm going to copy the resource ID. I'll again come back to my notepad. This is the resource ID. Perfect. The API version is 2021-03-01. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to add it here and I'm just going to change this. It's 2021, I suppose. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to remove this as well. So it's API version 2021-03-01. And then again, the last piece, which is https management.azure.com. Okay. So I'll paste this value here. Perfect. Now I'm going to copy this and I'll again go back to my Postman. And let's see if I can access. Okay, there's something wrong. Okay, I'm going to copy this again. I think again I've made the same mistake. Give me a moment. Copy. Paste. Yes. Send. Perfect. You can see now I'm getting the access to my VM. I can actually go ahead and query any of these properties and perform any of these actions related to this particular resource type, which is virtual machine. As we move on with this playlist, I'm going to showcase you a different set of examples. But for now, this is how you can construct the endpoint for practically speaking any resource. I mean, I can just go ahead and click on this log analytics workspace. I can click on JSON view. I can copy this from here. And I can just again construct this with the help of API version and this particular section. That's all you have to do and you will be able to access everything. Now there is one more thing which is very important and that I would like to show you, and that is the purpose of using different API versions. Okay, and let me show you this with one of the known resource type, and then things will make a lot more sense. So this is my Exchange server, and let's say if I go ahead and query this particular API version, then I'm getting this set of information which is having around 73 lines. I mean, I'm just giving you a very naive example, and then I'll click on this and I'll choose the latest one, and you can see I can see a couple of scroll bars, right? And if I go ahead and copy this value now to a different notepad, I can see here it was around 73 and here it is around 76. Now, since I know this, I'm quickly highlighting this, that if I'm using this version of API, which is 2023-07-01, I'm getting one more additional field, which is time created in this particular last section of provisioning state. Okay, so this is just an FYI that if you use different API versions, there could be a possibility that there are some additional attributes or values that you get. Okay, so this was all about knowing how to access Azure REST APIs with the help of Postman. Step number one, just go ahead and create an application in your Azure AD, which we have just created. Now, I was showing you multiple scenarios wherein you can get certain errors, but what you should do the moment you create this particular application, you should just go ahead and assign the respective APIs permissions. That should work out of the box. Okay, then once you have all this, then what you can do is you can go ahead and request an authorization token here, but make sure you have all the right set of values, the resource and everything. Once you have the token, then go ahead and construct a specific endpoint for you. And that's it. I mean, I've shown you the method how you can go to a specific resource and get everything created for you. Okay, so now let's talk about a quick summary of what all we have discussed in this video. We have discussed about registration of an application in Azure AD, how it is working in authorization code flow because there is a user interaction, structure of Azure Management API endpoint, I mean the resource ID, API version, and HTTPS management.azure.com, combining all these three values. And then I've shown you how you can access Azure REST API with Postman. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can access Azure REST API with OAuth client credential flow. So if you think that this channel is helping you to learn anything new, please feel free to subscribe and share this video with your technical community. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.